Let's jump right in. Today, we're looking at what has to be one of the most fascinating logistical challenges in all of ancient history. Ancient Israel's 40-year journey right after their exodus from Egypt. We're going to unpack the exact mechanics of their survival, breaking down the text of Exodus chapter 16. Just imagine trying to move an entire population into a completely barren, hostile environment. How exactly does a food supply chain work when there is literally no supply chain? To really wrap our heads around the gravity of this text, we have to grasp the staggering scale of the timeline here. 40 years. They wandered for 4 decades in an uninhabitable wasteland. This wasn't some long weekend camping trip that kind of went off the rails. This was a massive, multi-generational journey through a harsh, unforgiving environment where absolutely nothing grows. So, it begs the obvious question. How did an entire nation actually survive the wilderness? The text of Exodus 16 isn't just some abstract theological document. It actually lays out a highly specific set of survival mechanics, daily operations, and strict regulations that kept this massive assembly of people alive. All right, here's our blueprint for today. First, we've got the crisis in the wilderness. Next, bread raining from heaven, followed by the rules of manna. Then, instituting the Holy Sabbath, and we'll wrap up with the 40-year legacy. Let's get into it. Section 1. Crisis in the wilderness, the threat of mutiny. To set the scene, the congregation has just left Elim and arrived in the wilderness of Sin, which is right between Elim and Sinai. The text gives us an exact date, the 15th day of the second month after leaving Egypt. So they've been out of Egypt for exactly 1 month. And the terrifying reality of their situation has just hit them. The text gives us this brilliant, almost tragic look at human nature under extreme stress. The whole congregation starts grumbling against Moses and Aaron. They're literally romanticizing their slavery. They're saying, oh, back in Egypt, we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. And they contrast that idealized memory with their current reality, accusing Moses of bringing them out there to kill this whole assembly with hunger. They are staring down mass starvation, and a full-blown mutiny is brewing. Moses and Aaron realize they need to defuse this bomb fast. They tell the people God has heard their complaints, and then Moses uses this brilliant leadership tactic. He tells them, your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. It's a massive rhetorical pivot. He redirects the anger of hundreds of thousands of panicked, starving people away from himself and onto the divine authority that actually led them out there. Section 2. Bread raining from heaven, the divine provision. Right as the crisis hits a boiling point, God steps in. The text doesn't hold back on the sensory details of how this provision physically happened. Verse 13 tells us that in the evening, an absolute swarm of quail comes up and just completely covers the camp, providing the meat they were promised. And then, the next morning, a heavy dew settles all around the camp. But the really wild part is what happens after that dew evaporates. It left this bizarre substance all over the desert floor. The text describes it as a fine, flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. Picture it. The Israelites step out of their tents, look at this weird frost-like stuff everywhere, and they're just completely baffled. Now, here's a fascinating linguistic tidbit. When the Israelites saw these flakes, they looked at each other and said, "What is it?" Because they honestly had no clue. Well, the text notes the house of Israel called it manna, and that word actually derives from the Hebrew phrase manhu, which literally translates to, you guessed it, what is it? Their utter confusion literally became the name of the food they'd eat for the next 4 decades. To really ground this for us, the ancient author gives us the exact appearance and flavor profile. Moses tells them this is the bread the Lord has provided. It was white, shaped kind of like coriander seed, and it tasted sweet, like wafers made with honey. Sounds pretty good, actually. Section 3. The rules of manna, a daily test of obedience. Okay, this is where the survival mechanics really kick into high gear. God makes it super clear to Moses that this food isn't just about calories, it's a test. It's a daily mechanism to see whether they will actually walk in his law. This wasn't a free-for-all. There were strict, non-negotiable operating procedures. Step 1, gather it daily morning by morning. Why? Because once the sun got hot, the manna literally melted away. Step 2, every single person had to take an exact measurement based on how many people were in their tent. And step 3, the big one, leave absolutely nothing until morning. Absolutely zero hoarding allowed. Let's look a bit closer at that measurement they had together. An omer. If we translate that ancient metric into something we recognize today, An omer is about 2 quarts, or roughly 2 liters volume per person, every single day. And miraculously, the text points out that whether someone gathered a lot or a little, when they actually measured it out, everyone had exactly enough, nothing lacking, nothing left over. Quick technical side note for the history buffs out there. The very last verse of Exodus 16 actually clarifies what an omer is in the broader context of ancient measurements, defining it as exactly 1/10 of an ephah. So, strict obedience to that daily limit was absolutely required. But, human nature being what it is, some folks thought they knew better. They tried to stash some manna away overnight as a little security blanket. But the consequences were incredibly grim. The text is very vivid here. The hoarded manna immediately bred worms and stink. It rotted on the spot, and Moses was furious with them. Section 4, instituting the Holy Sabbath, the day of rest. Now, that daily rhythm of gathering manna and having it melt or rot if you didn't follow the rules completely changes at the end of the week. God introduces a massive logistical shift on the 6th day. Let's run the numbers and see how this schedule builds. For days 1 through 5, the allowance is strictly 1 omer per person. But on day 6, the leaders come to Moses and report that the people gathered twice as much, 2 omers each. Moses is like, exactly, this is what the Lord commanded. Because day 7 is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath. On that day, the gathering allowance drops to 0. Since they couldn't gather on the 7th day, the rules had to adapt. Moses tells them to bake and boil what they need on the 6th day and save the rest. And here is the miraculous exception to that rotting rule we saw earlier. When they saved the extra manna for the Sabbath, it didn't stink, and it didn't breed worms. It was perfectly preserved, allowing them a true solemn day of rest. Because, as Moses warned them, there would be absolutely no manna out in the field on the 7th day. And yet, some people still didn't listen. On the 7th day, some stubborn folks wandered out into the field to gather, and surprise, surprise, they found nothing. The Lord actually admonishes Moses, asking how long these people are going to refuse to keep his laws. He strictly enforces it, saying, "See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Let no one go out of his place." And finally, the people rested on the 7th day. Section 5, a 40-year legacy, the jar of remembrance. As we wrap up the chapter, we see how this daily survival mechanic gets transformed into a permanent historical legacy for the entire nation. Moses commands Aaron to grab a jar, put exactly 1 omer of manna into it, and place it before the Lord. The text tells us the exact purpose of this. It's so that future generations may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Aaron does exactly that, placing it before the testimony to be kept forever. It becomes this tangible artifact of their survival. Zooming out to the full timeline of this ancient journey, the sheer duration of this daily reliance is just mind-blowing. They leave Egypt, they hit that terrifying starvation crisis in the wilderness of Sin exactly 1 month later, and then they are sustained by this daily manna for a staggering 40 years. The chapter concludes by noting that they ate the manna all the way until they finally reach a habitable land, the border of Canaan. So, we've seen how the mechanics of Exodus 16 actually functioned, right? The massive scale of a 40-year journey, that strict daily limit of 1 omer, the immediate rotting of any hoarded food, and the intense discipline of the Sabbath rest. I want to leave you with this thought. This wasn't just about food. This was literally about shaping the habits of an entire nation. If your very survival in a wasteland depended on strict, unyielding daily obedience to those rules for 40 years, would you pass the test?